Hey, everybody, this is your boy John, and with me, as always, is Matt.
What up, y'all?
And again, this is the Geeks from the Multiverse podcast, and today we'll be talking about 80s and 90s cartoons. So let's get geeky. So, Matt, I wanted to give you a quick update on my son. Okay.
Okay.
So, I mentioned before that, he was, I don't even know how many weeks ago. It was probably a long time ago at this point, but basically, he's 34 weeks now. My wife went in for a checkup and he's doing great. He's doing, what he needs to be doing. And, he's kind of a pain in the butt. I didn't tell you this part. And the reason why is because they were doing some kind of scans and they were trying to be like, hey, could you like see if your son can like, sit still and maybe do like, a scan of like the lungs and the heart and stuff like so his heart's fine, but they're trying to record like a 3 second or no, sorry, it was 30 seconds is what I was told. They have to do a 30-second like view of the lungs working. This little man, okay, and I know he's a pain in my butt, decided to only breathe for 3 seconds and then stop. And then like he was doing it multiple times, and so they were just like, why isn't he just like listening or like why isn't he doing his thing? I'm like, and of course my wife is just like, well, he takes after you, and I said, no, he takes after both of us. It's not just me. But like it's not just me in this moment. But anyways, I was thinking about it a little bit ago, and it's crazy that some of the cartoons and shows that come out today. So like I think of like Coco Melon, Baby Shark, PJ Maxx, or some of these other ones on Disney and all these other ones. Um, they don't. I don't even know how to describe it. They kind of scare me. Like it doesn't really like to me like is more educational. It's kind of like they're brainwashing these kids. And it's kind of like when we were growing up, it was like you learn, you do the educational pieces like Sesame Street, you know, uh, Barney, but again, we don't talk about Barney,
No, we don't talk about Barney.
but we learn from these these shows, and we're
Yeah.
like as a kid, you're like, yeah, like I know my ABCs, I know my numbers, I know all these things, but it seemed like they were more educational, funny, and you kind of learned a lesson from it. Like nowadays, it's kind of like they're just kind of like playing it off, and it's not really as real, I guess, if you want to like as it should be. Kind of like
Yeah.
what we've grown up on.
And I think you look at some of the cartoons nowadays, they're very edgy. So it's very hard to tell like what is wholesome and geared towards kids and what's really not geared towards kids.
Yeah, and I look at like TV shows now, and they're not as funny as anymore. They're not like they try to be. They're over exaggerating. I think that's what it is,
Yeah, yeah.
and they don't really like do a good job of like introducing comedy the way like a lot of the 80s and 90s kind of like brought in the. I mean, I'll say it like this, but like how like you watch certain shows and movies, how they like you grow up and you didn't even think about how they like threw in like sexual innuendos or like some of the weird like little things like
Yeah, yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But it was weird, but like, as a kid you don't think about it, but now as an adult you're like, "Oh my god." Like that's what they were talking about? Like you didn't even think about that in that moment, but like
Yeah.
that was the thing about the 80s and 90s they like to do so much, but nowadays you can't do that. Like it's so much censorship and there's so much stuff going on, like it doesn't make any sense anymore. You
Yeah,
know.
and I mean, obviously, yeah, we grew up in different generations, but some of the greatest memories that I have was, getting up early Saturday mornings and watching cartoons because they were on pretty much most of the morning into most of the afternoon until like the first, movies or TV shows started coming on.
Oh, and that's pretty much when your parents would kick you out and say, "Hey, go play outside."
Yeah. And every day before school, cartoons were always on. So, that's when your Transformers and your GI Joe and your Thundercats, like all of those were on pretty much back to back.
I mean, and I can even say like, granted, I understand like Transformers, Voltron, all that stuff was back in your time, but like I remember even watching like Pokemon. Like I know that wasn't like one you've watched, but like some of like the Nickelodeon shows or like Disney Channel shows, like whatever, like a lot of them like showed up and they're like, "Hey, this is great." You'd watch these TV shows right before school or like even after school.
Yeah.
Like maybe your parents aren't home yet. You're like, I'm gonna throw something on, and then like, or even like sometimes like the when Nickelodeon did like Nick at Night, or like the late time, like
Yep.
our Cartoon Network or something like that, they would do like the late time, like kind of like animations and things like that. So it's like nowadays they don't do that anymore. Like they don't. You just throw it on. You're like, oh, cool. I guess I'll watch something on Hulu and
Yeah.
Disney or whatever. It just like it's not the
And
same
it's
anymore.
it's very hard to find even some of these older shows in general. Like trying to find Transformers, like you have to go on like Tubi just to find it.
Yeah,
And
and who watches Tubi?
nobody, nobody does. But that's just the thing. Like, trying to find some of these, it's very, very difficult. They're not mainstream anymore, but I absolutely love them. But, we're kind of just diving in right to the 80s cartoons. I guess, more my genre because I love them.
I'm not saying that I haven't seen some of these. Some of them I have,
Yeah.
later on in my life, but like, you know, like, um, like GI Joe. I do remember as a kid, my brother had like ironically enough, a DVD set of the original like series, and we would watch them, and we'd be like, GI Joe. We'd sing the theme song, and we'd get into it, and it was just funny. But like, I know one thing you and I talked about. I think actually before the podcast was one of the interesting things about GI Joe that they really like harped upon. And I know you. I'm going to let you talk about this more, but
Yeah. I mean, I think with G.I. Joe, they also did it with Transformers too. I don't know so much if they did it with a lot of the other, shows per se. But I know as far as like Transformers, GI Joe in particular, it was they definitely had certain episodes that taught a story that they taught a message, whether it was good morals, being a good person, helping your neighbors. Um, you know they did certain episodes on the effects of drug use and addiction.
yeah. So don't do drugs, basically.
Yeah, I mean they didn't obviously show people using drugs, but they taught that message. And
Well,
that's like
yeah.
one of the things that GI Joe used as a vehicle to help kind of move forward, kind of that call it an agenda, call it what you will, but
I would say more of a PSA. I mean, that's what they
yeah.
really did back then.
And that's kind of that wholesome thing that being an American hero, it's the vehicle that GI Joe used, um partly because of being in the 80s. It was a violent cartoon, so they kind of had to show a positive message to
Well, to kids and
overshadow
yeah.
the violence that was the cartoon. But some of the 80s cartoons, I think overall when I looked it up, there was about 213 overall cartoons. Whether they were all in the United States, I don't know.
Well, I mean, in a lot of those '80s cartoons, whether they were made in America or like they were somewhere else,
Yeah.
I know more in America based. I mean, like it was more like during the Ronald Reagan like administration, so they were talking about like the anti-drugs, like the anti, really the anti anything. It was just more like, hey, don't do drugs, don't do this, don't do that, because unfortunately at that time there was a big, overall crisis, like you was talking about with drugs, crime, all these different characteristics in that time, and like that's why they had to have these PSAs because they wanted to make sure that kids weren't trying to emulate, some of their cartoons or some of these, let's say gory or
Yeah.
at that time, I don't know.
I mean, you look at all of them, and I'll get into. We have I have a small list here, but I think you look at a lot of these 80s cartoons, and a lot of them have a more positive spin. The way that they did the cartoons in general are more positive. Like they're not really dark. They're not, overly sexualized. They're not, there's no adult language in them. They tell a story, and that's, I think, iconic for a lot of the 80s cartoons is a lot of them were very much story driven.
Yeah, I mean, and then they did have, of course, they introduced the characters in the beginning and do that, but they would build upon the story
Yeah.
so that way you could get sucked in and really get involved with what was going on in that episode. So like on next week's episode of Transformers, like
Yeah,
then they
and
would
then
dive into it.
they would show you kind of like a preview of what was on, for next week, and you would get that preview, but they would kind of continue that story. But some of the ones that I've listed: GI Joe, Transformers, Voltron. I love Voltron. Kind of like the cartoon version, like the original kind of cartoon version. If you were gonna do Power Rangers,
Yeah, and so like I mean, granted, I love the original Power Rangers, but that's
oh, I
just
love
me.
Power Rangers too. But if you were to, if you were to like, where did they get their inspiration? I would have to say it would probably be, from Voltron in the way that the cartoon was. It's basically pretty much the same thing, same idea.
That makes sense. I mean, Japanese, decided to take it over, but yeah, no, makes sense.
Obviously, Power Rangers is a little different, but I digress. Thundercats, another great cartoon.
Yep. So again, even though I wasn't growing up in that era, I did, I watched some of the Thundercats,
Yeah.
some of the other TV shows you've already mentioned. So
He-Man and the Masters of the Universe.
watched. I only watched a little bit. I mean, what was it? Was it Skeletor? Was one of them?
Skeletor. He-Man. He-Man was an interesting cartoon. In the way, if you really want to go down this rabbit hole, I'm not going to go down it in
Let's
this
not do it
episode.
with the Terminator when like that.
But if you really want to go down a wild ride, just look up some He-Man character names. They're not very imaginative at the end of the day. Everything was, you had a guy that looked like kind of a beast. Well, he was Beastman. You had a guy that looked kind of like a fish. Well, he was
Fishman.
Fishman, yeah. Um,
Okay.
One of the funny things is, I think Kevin Smith,
Okay. Oh, yep.
he did a remake of He-Man.
Oh boy.
And so there are these people in kind of the He-Man universe. They're called the Glavernians. They live in Glavernia.
Let me guess. They're in their gloves.
I don't know. I forget. I don't think they're gloves though.
Okay.
I think they just look like people.
Okay.
But there was a like an artifact that they were looking for. And I'm not joking with this.
So this is like you could look this up right now.
This is a legit thing. It was the glove of Glavernia like the Glavernians have this as an artifact.
so
It's a literal glove artifact that was stolen from the Glavernians in Glavernia.
So hold on. So hold on. No. I'm going to make a little reference. I don't know how well this is going to go, but is that the glove from Michael Jackson? The missing?
I doubt it.
Oh,
Unless he was a Glavernian, but
unless he was a Liberty. I'm only asking because
but that's what I'm saying. Like, it wasn't very imaginative. Like, you have a glove, it's like a magical artifact.
Okay.
It was very precious to them, but like the people are called Glavernians. The land that they live in is Glavernia. That's why they're Glavernians, obviously.
I swear that they should just be glove people or like gloves than just talk.
And they have an artifact that's an actual glove.
Like I'm just saying, like if you're gonna be called the Glavernians, then you really should just be like a legit glove.
But I mean, Skeletor is a skeleton.
Well,
So I mean, it's not very imaginative at the end of the day, and you can kind of go down that rabbit hole if you really want to. It just gets worse as you keep looking up these characters. They're literally like, you see a Wolfman.
I guess what I'm trying to, so if they look like something, they're just gonna put a man after it.
Yeah, I mean, they did it with He-Man, even though
I mean, yeah.
the Kevin Smith kind of remake of it. The he was an actual kind of title for the power that he got.
Wait,
So
what was? Oh, wait a minute. Now I'm thinking about it. It is an animated show, right? That he did. Yeah, it
yes,
was like, but he was a younger version of himself,
no,
kind of.
I think it was just a complete like retelling of the
Oh, the
story.
story. Okay,
Yeah,
because I think I do remember seeing like a trailer or something for it a while back. But I think I know what you're talking about.
yeah. So there were other previous like masters of the universe, and they all had the he before their names.
But let me guess, his first name was Man.
I don't know how we got the man, to be honest, but
But anyways, go ahead.
we're gonna move on. So one of the bigger ones that's still on, I believe, I don't think they've been canceled
Oh
yet, is
no.
the Simpsons.
Well, yeah, because Disney bought Fox, as we have already known. So of course they're going to continue it.
So even though it's technicality because the show started in '89, it counts.
It's
It's
an
an
'80s
80, it's an
show.
'80 show.
It's a very late '80s show, but yeah,
Um, the real Ghostbusters,
the TV show or the movie.
the cartoon.
Okay, well that's why I was asking because I
Yeah,
mean I mean the movies did come out in the '80s, so
I'm strictly talking the cartoon.
okay, so yeah, I
Yeah,
know what you're saying. Yep.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles,
Oh yeah, that's a good one. The
Alvin and
cartoon.
the Chipmunks.
I, I don't. Sure, that's fine. I got what you're saying, but yeah, that's fine.
DuckTales.
That's one of. See, I love Ducktales. I mean, granted, it was
DuckTales.
woo.
Woo.
I mean, but it was a good. Honestly, it had a great theme for like
Yeah.
but it was an interesting take on Scrooge McDuck and like the nephews of Donald Duck and like
Yeah.
all the different characters. But it was great, man. It was just I don't know how to
Yeah.
explain it. You just got to watch it. You know.
Yeah. And the last one, Inspector Gadget.
Oh, sorry. We're just singing theme songs now, but no, Inspector Gadget, man, like it was good too. I mean, granted, you look at
He's kind of a doofus, but
well, yes, and the TV show, yes, and it's funny how his niece was always the one that like,
Penny.
yeah, Penny, who's like always the one trying to like help him out, and like he screws everything up, but she's like the smart one, and the dog, what's the dog's name?
I don't remember.
But like he would like he's even smarter than
Yeah,
Inspector
yeah,
Gadget
yeah.
too. So, but another great show.
And they're all great, and there's much, much more. Obviously, that we could mention. We could spend the whole show just on '80s cartoons because there's that many that are probably equally as good. Like I think Mask came out in the '80s, which it wasn't as.
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of, I guess, maybe equal to GI Joe, just not as popular.
But I
And the
don't
way
think
that it was kind of,
it was wacky. It was a very like wacky.
it was wacky. I mean, it had kind of a similar theme to GI Joe in
Yeah.
regards to like what Mask was doing. It just wasn't as popular as GI Joe was.
Well, and I think it only lasted for like maybe a season or two, and I'm pretty sure it got canceled. I don't think it really lasted a really long time, but um, I know with like the next kind of like leading into the '90s though, um, looking at how the '80s, I guess some ways, like it kind of helped the '90s become its like own like subgenre in a sense because and I'll say this because 80s was like we were saying like it was more like character story based and all that stuff but
Yeah,
like
it definitely was more story based. Like when you look at, Transformers and GI Joe, Voltron, yes, there are characters in those cartoons, but everything had a story. Like you're going through that journey of the the overall story of GI Joe and them going after Cobra.
I'm not going to sing that one because that one like it's too annoying sometimes but
Transformers, them trying to get back to Cybertron and beating Megatron, and you know each one of these cartoons, like, it had a story.
yeah and a lot of them it's funny sometimes like some of them like GI Joe and like Transformers like they were strictly 80s because they never really went into the 90s as much but like DuckTales was kind of that weird one like it started I think it was like 87 and like landed in like 90 something but like it lasted for a while where
Yeah,
it kind of got the best of both 80s and 90s in that sense so there's
and some of them had, I mean, Transformers had many different
well variations yeah
variations. GI Joe had different variations, but I think, like, once you get into the '90s, like, it definitely shifted from, I think, story driven narratives to more character driven, and what was kind of going on with,
Right, that individual, or it could have been another character in that, that universe of that story.
where each episode might not have been the story of the whole season.
Right.
It was, each episode was a different story, but it was about that character
Right.
or what was going on in that character's life at that moment.
It was almost like not so much a journey, but like mini adventures, like in depending on what show you were like watching
Yeah.
and doing. But I will say this before we get into the 90s, Matt. Okay. If you had to rate 80s, like your, let's say, top 5, like favorite 80s shows, what do you think those would be?
Well, I mean, top 5 are
Well, hold on.
probably ones that I already have mentioned.
Well, no, I understand, but you have to pick 5 and you have to list them in order from 1 to 5. If you had to choose which ones, what would be on your list?
All right, so top 5 probably would start with GI Joe, go to Transformers, Voltron, Thundercats, and then He-Man.
Oh, wow. So you just say, you know what? I'm done with DuckTales, Inspector Gadget. Just throw them out.
I mean, DuckTales and Inspector Gadget were great, but I don't know if I've really watched them as steady as I watched the others.
Okay. Okay. No, fair enough. Fair enough. I know. So you're more serious, like when it because those TV shows, in a way, were more serious. Like that's what it is. Like the other ones,
They were more action driven.
well,
And
action
I think
driven and
that
serious.
was
Yeah.
more what I was driven to. And you look at DuckTales and Inspector Gadget and even Alvin and the Chipmunks, there was a lot more comedy, I think, involved with those. Even Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, even though like there was a lot of action, there definitely was a lot more comedy in the cartoon itself.
Yeah. I mean, I could kind of flip this here, but like I don't mind doing like the action driven, like having a story, building the characters and doing all that. But like to me, like if I'm just like, you're like, you know what, I'm just gonna throw something on, just kind of listen and watch and like do whatever. Yeah, I'm gonna throw on some comedy, like do some like other things if I'm doing other things. But like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like even back in the day, like the very first series of it, not the new, whatever variations there are now, and even the movies and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
like, it was just like it was comedy, but like, I mean, in some ways it had its own story and, kind of dives in a little bit. But like, yeah, Alvin and the Chipmunks, I don't even want to get started on that. That was a whole nother ball game on that one.
No, but I think, you look at G.I. Joe, you look at Transformers, you look at Thundercats, maybe not so much He-Man because the theme song wasn't very inspiring, but like G.I. Joe, Transformers, Thundercats, like their theme songs were very inspiring. Like G.I. Joe was probably the most probably inspiring of all
Oh,
of all
absolutely,
of them. Like
absolutely.
you watch it and you like, I mean, especially as like 11, 12-year-old kid, like watching.
I mean, the first literally line is GI Joe, and then it just like goes right into it, and it's
Yeah.
like, it's just, and then they like, and of course it's like, it goes to that, and then it's like a narrator going, yeah, I like GI Joe, blah blah blah, and then they go into it, but like, it is a good theme song, and then
It's like really, really just really inspiring. And, Transformers is kind of the same way. It's more more of that hair metal,
yeah,
80s, kind of theme song. Thundercats, again, it's that really high, inspiring, epic kind of theme song that, like, as a 12-year-old kid, you're like, yeah, let's go.
well,
Thundercats are on the move.
let's do it, no, but I agree. Like some of the, it's funny how like when we talk about like some of like the modern day stuff, a lot of their theme songs are really dumb. And I say this because like you look at the 80s, you look at the 90s, a lot of the best theme songs I've ever heard in my life come from these eras. Like, and I know we're going to now try to transition into the 90s here,
Yeah.
but like, one of my favorite theme songs of all freaking time. I'm not kidding. I actually had it on my phone for long. Like I would actually play it when it comes to like people calling me, like that's what it would actually be. And it's the X-Men.
Do-do-do-do-do-do.
Do-do-do-do-do-do-do, right? So I'm telling you, if you haven't, look up X-Men 90s like theme song. I'm telling you right now,
It's on our playlist.
it is on the playlist, and I can tell you, it is one of my favorite theme songs of all time. And I'm not, I mean, granted, Power Rangers theme song was definitely up there, but I'm just saying, like X-Men just had an edge, and it was one of the my personal favorite like theme songs. Like I said, look it up. I guarantee you'll love it. But going in the '90s, I mean, granted, yes, I was a kid, for a bit. Okay, I wasn't like I understand you can say, "Oh, I'm a '90s kid." Well, yes, you technically were when it came to like high school and so forth like that. But if we're talking like certain things, I mean, like yeah, I do remember certain TV shows that I grew up on that that came out. And granted, yeah, I was younger, of course, but like a lot of it did kind of lead towards my youth in that sense. So like, for example, like I'm going to mention a couple on here because just like Matt said, there's a lot of 80s, series. And I can tell you from this list that, we were kind of looking up, there's about 330 cartoon series just in the 90s alone, which is insane.
Yeah, there's over 100 more, and like I said for the 80s, like I don't know if all 330 or however there are, like if they were USA based or if they were international shows. That's just the number that was overall. That's how many
Right. At that time.
individual cartoon series there were.
But like, so like, here's some examples, right? So cat dog. So one of my favorites is like cat dog, cat dog, alone in the world of the little cat dog. Like it just sticks in your head, man. Like I know it's stupid, but it's like it's the funniest thing
Yeah.
because it literally is. It's literally what it says. It's about a cat and a dog that are attached together. They're like
Yeah.
it's stupid, but I will tell you that '90s just like they have really sometimes they had dumb titles, but like it was that wacky kind of funny, TV shows like Cat Dog was one of them.
Yep.
I mean, I won't mention the next one, but I'll kind of jump
Oh,
around here.
come
I
on,
will
man.
no, I will mention it, but just give me a second. I'm gonna because it's the wackiness first, and then I'll get into the serious. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
So Cat Dog, Ed, and Eddie, like these three guys, I can't
Oh
even
my
start.
gosh.
These guys were interesting. Like if you ever watch it, okay. Unfortunately, I saw that Cartoon Network is no longer a thing now. But I don't know if you knew this or not.
Yeah, that's sad.
It is sad because unfortunately these guys were a part of it. Dexter's Laboratory.
Ed.
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 Oh, you mean? Ding, 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 ding. But then we go Ed and Eddie. But anyways, so Dexter's Laboratory. I loved this as a kid. I always
Right.
love when so it's Dexter and his older sister Dee Dee, and then he has like a couple others. And I will just say that there are some really weird and disturbing things about Dexter's Laboratory that it was kind of that weird '90s thing where unfortunately there's a lot of memes nowadays that like to sexualize, I will say, certain characters from the '90s, and
Yes.
unfortunately
Yeah.
one of them is Dexter's mom, is one of the people,
Mhm.
unfortunately. But Angry Beavers, which I had watched, and again, literally, it's about two angry beavers who are brothers, and they again, they're just it's stupid.
I never watched I never watched it regularly, but I mean that one was for its time in the 90s was pretty edgy. And I
Yeah.
know that they kind of re-released it and it was a little edgier.
Yeah, I mean, I never watched the newer one, but like the older one was like like a lot of these shows, they were they were edgy, they were funny, they were just it had
Yeah.
like that raunchiness to it, but like Animaniacs. I mean, oh my
You're
god.
talking a show that pushed the boundary.
Oh my god. I mean, but some of the most interesting voice actors like that were on that show, like I can't remember the one guy's name, but the one who plays Wacko.
Yeah.
Like there was one episode that he literally lists all the countries in the entire world, and he did it in one take. And then I saw him do it again like so many years later. I'm like, and he remembers it so clearly, and it's
Yeah.
crazy. And then you got Pinky and the Brain, which was part of like Animaniacs and stuff. Narv. you know, Pinky, what are we gonna do tonight?
We're going to take over
The world. Anyways, and then of course one of another like longer running shows is SpongeBob, right? So SpongeBob SquarePants. I mean, one of my favorite episodes, and this was in the '90s, like maybe early 2000, was it was called the Marching Band, and it was literally at the very end. It was basically they were like playing in like the Super Bowl, and like they had it was like one of the most like epic like I don't know, like if you haven't seen this episode, I just go find it on YouTube. It's one of my favorites because I tell you why it's one of my favorites. One of my favorite lines from SpongeBob is, Patrick literally talks to Squidward and he goes, "Is mayonnaise an instrument?" And then Squidward's like, "No, Patrick, mayonnaise is not an instrument." And then he goes, "Horseradish is not an instrument either." And then basically and then for some weird reason, like in the episode too, Patrick like Sandy basically like beats the crap out of Patrick and like he comes back in and he's like wearing a trombone on his head or something like that. And he's like, "Bwah, bwah, 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 bwah." And then he goes, "The owner of the white sedan, you left your lights on." And it's like, it's so weird. It was just like a weird episode, but it was honestly one of my favorites from like that, but it's still a good show. I mean, it's funny how I think it was one night I watched it with my mother in law and of course my father in law. They were watching SpongeBob, and I'm like, "Why are you watching this show like this?" And they're like, "Oh, it's just great." I'm like, "You watch this my wife?" And you're like, "Yeah, we used to watch this when she was young." And I'm like,
Yeah,
"I mean,
it's
that's
such an
cool, but it's
obscure show. Like,
yeah." I mean, I will say this: the original idea for the show is not what you think. I mean, there's a lot. Like, if you want to talk about edgy, there's a lot of things about that show that originally it was not supposed to be for kids. It
yeah,
was supposed to be an adult show.
that doesn't surprise me at all.
I mean, like you'd have to watch it to really understand, but I'm telling you, the original idea was never intended for kids. It was basically an adult show, but they then changed it to a kid show, which I'm like, and it's still edgy. I mean, there's some things that I'm like, yeah, I don't know if you should be talking about that right
He
now.
was number one.
But like it's funny, like so many people know like the
Yeah,
SpongeBob references. It's so funny how you remember all that stuff.
yeah.
And then you look at Rugrats, right? So like Rugrats was always like a big one. I remember watching that as a kid. Of course, like everyone's like, "Well, that's like a kid show." I'm like, "Well, it was," but even adults in some or like teenagers were watching this show. And like even like when they did All Grown Ups, like later on in time. I mean, it was just Rugrats was like a staple. I don't know. It was just like one of those like good
It was
'90s
a big one.
cartoons.
Yeah, it was a big show.
And then another one that really, I'm going to end it with this one, and then I'll of course add the serious ones in a second. This one I know you would know,
I watched this one a lot.
Ren and Stimpy.
Yes.
Okay, so these guys, you want to talk about edgy?
Stimpy, you idiot.
Like these guys were edgy, man. Like these guys were way like for a
Yes.
'90s show. Like this should not have been a kid show,
No,
but it was.
but it was.
I mean,
Oh yeah, I mean, it's such a classic now, and I mean, I absolutely loved this show, but it had its definite moments where it was gross,
oh yeah, no,
it was crude.
it definitely just seemed like the '90s. Like I said, when it came to ratings, that's why when they were talking about like the anti, drug and bullying and all this other stuff back in the '80s, the '90s didn't care. They just talked about anything they wanted to at that point.
No, I think they pushed the envelope to where I think could, but
Well,
they didn't quite go over
they
that
were
threshold, but they went really close.
no, there was a lot of shows that did that though. They really pushed the envelope, and then they were like, "Let's see how far we could take this
Yeah.
without upsetting up like a lot of moms and dads out there." You know, but like some of the more serious ones, since I just talked about the wacky ones. So Captain Planet and the Planeteers. So I always remember Captain Planet. He's our hero. Like it goes into it, but it's basically about these like teenagers. That basically have these like superpowers. Like all of them have like it's like earth, water, fire, wind, and then
Yeah.
it's heart. And it's like and they're like our powers combined. It's Captain Planet. And it's just like it was kind of like that weird wacky one, but it kind of took that '80s vibe because it
It
taught you a lesson at the very end too.
it definitely took the '80s vibe because I mean, Captain Planet I mean, they basically went, after people who were, you know, cutting down the rainforest or
Yeah, or like poaching or
poaching or polluting, or like they were doing, I mean, they weren't like trying to take over the world or murdering people. They
no, but basically this show was literally Earth Day
yeah,
every single day.
yeah. Yeah, they were doing things to protect the earth is what they were doing. I don't know how long the show went, but I don't think it went very long.
No, I don't think it maybe went on for like maybe 2 or 3 seasons. I don't think it really went like further on,
But
but
it's still a pretty classic like
oh yeah, no, I
cartoon
mean,
series.
and you could watch it, you could easily binge watch it cuz it's usually like 20, 30 minutes if that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then the last one that was on this list, which I did actually I never watched it originally until I want to say it was a few years ago I decided to binge watch it. Was Gargoyles.
Yeah.
And that one was a serious show. This one was also with Keith David when he started like really voice acting early on in his days. But it was that one was really story driven. That one actually wasn't just based on characters. It was actually about, how the gargoyles came to be and, how they um, were trying to basically help humanity, and try to like understand how humans and gargoyles can like coexist in a world. And it was weird because like you actually had like the Keith David character like fall in love with a human. So a gargoyle falling loving with a human was kind of a weird scenario in my opinion. I don't think that's I don't know if you call that bestiality or I don't know what you call that, but it seems kind of weird that a gargoyle and a human would be romantically involved with each other.
That is kind of weird, yes.
But that was part of the storyline, and
Yeah.
it was like that's kind of a weird concept. But like 90s for me, like if I'm gonna pick my top five, okay, it's a tough one. I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna be very tough. But I will say, and I'm actually gonna throw ones that aren't even on the list that we've even
I
mentioned.
actually have a couple maybe before you go cuz
Oh, now you have a couple now.
there's a couple that if I don't mention these, it would be a serious crime against our podcast if I didn't mention them.
Well, it's probably some of the ones that I already mentioned. But go ahead.
They're actually not on because they're not on this list, and they're not ones that you probably would mention.
Okay, fine.
Um, one, South Park,
Okay,
which was 97.
okay, fair enough.
Um, if you want to talk about a show that's pushed envelopes,
And it's still going on to this
um,
day.
I think they pushed the envelope off the table and it fell somewhere where nobody else can find it.
That's true.
Um,
Cartman, just look up Cartman, you'll know.
But one of my absolute favorite, and I'm so glad that they brought it back, Beavis and Butthead.
Oh boy.
1993.
Oh god. This okay, go on. And then the worst part is he actually does an impression.
Beavis and Butthead was probably for me was one of the funniest and greatest like cartoons in the 90s. It's the dumbest thing you'll ever watch,
Yep.
but it's just really like as dumb as those two characters are. Part of the main show that they had was reviewing music videos, which honestly like was the funniest part of the entire cartoon series. And if you think of like, Mystery Science Theater,
Oh yeah. Yep.
and, they basically take these old, crappy kind of movies and they make this kind of comedy commentary over it. Beavis and Butthead did this for music videos, and it's absolutely hilarious. But that cartoon series was awesome, and I'm so glad that they brought it back for like a brand new like movie and series. Like it was a great.
I mean, and that's good that you bring that nostalgic back, and like that's the part of like 90s, nostalgia that was so great. And like some of them are bringing the series back. Like Animaniacs was one that they brought back a little bit ago. Of course, Beavis and Butthead. I think a lot of TV shows they could easily bring back and
Yeah.
do that. But I would say, since you cut me off, Matt, um, some of my favorites, of course, like I've already mentioned, it was like X-Men, like the '90s, animated series. Like
Yeah.
it was great, and I'm glad that they're actually going to remake.
X-Men 97.
Yeah, and they're basically continuing that story, which I'm really looking forward to. The Spider-Man animated series. I'm talking about more superhero, but like the Spider-Man
I
animated
think
series.
Avengers was 90s too, wasn't it? The original Avengers cartoon series.
Maybe. Yeah, I want to say so, but I didn't really watch that particular series. I mean, it didn't really last that long, though. I don't think. I think it
I don't
maybe
think it did.
like a season or two, but um, and we've mentioned like in the DC reboot, the Elseworld baby, the Batman animated series and the Superman like animated series, the Justice League, all these other ones, like literally Mark Hamill, again, I will always say this, did the best version of Joker in the animated series. Like he just embodied him. And that's why I think he's the best version of like voice acting wise, hands down. And like a lot of these other like, TV shows besides all that, I mean, I would even throw um I got to give it to SpongeBob, man, because I mean I grew up on that, and I mean it's still on, and I occasionally jump on and watch a couple of episodes that are new. I've always liked Dexter's Laboratory. Like, I mean, I know there's a bunch of TV shows, but it's like for some reason superheroes back in the '90s were really popular. Like I said,
Yeah.
like the X Men, like the Batman, Superman, the Justice League, all that. Like it was popular, and like that's why it became like a cult classic. In like now, like I said, Disney's trying to remake or not really remake, but like continue on that story with X Men, which I'm like, that's amazing. Like I would love to see how they're gonna do that. In DC, I mean, we're not going into DC territory, but
Yeah, we're
like
not going there because some of the stuff that they're creating now is
is ridiculous.
is way off base. But you know, uh, and that's where I think 90s, like I said, like we said earlier, like the 90s was definitely more character driven. So when you have like this X-Men, series, and you have Spider-Man, Batman, and Superman series that were very, very popular, it wasn't so much the story, even though the story was there. It was very much character driven. It was very much about the
Well, yeah,
characters.
well, right. I mean, X Men had multiple characters that they would base it on. Like Professor X and Wolverine, Beast, Cyclops,
Yeah,
all them.
I mean, did they have stories? Yes, of course they did.
But like like yeah, strictly Batman, strictly Superman, even Justice League. I mean, granted, they even had it was about multiple different characters, but they even had episodes specifically for
Right.
each of the characters in that show, and like Superman, like kind of following the whole Lex Luthor, was like was a toy man or like some of the other weird ones that he had, during his days
Yeah.
of Superman. But like, these stories really, kind of drove that like superhero narrative that I would say nowadays, we're really fond of, because now they're doing it live action and they're doing well. Marvel is not so much DC, but they do a good job with portraying these characters because they have those shows that did so well, and it made it, really, wonderful to watch as a kid,
Yeah.
and like now like I said, now you get to see it on the big screen and you're like, why can't you just go back to the '90s and like, follow what they just did, but they don't.
And I mean, that's really the comparison of today's cartoons versus, the 80s and 90s cartoons where I generally, like, they're not really called cartoons today. They're adult animation.
Yeah, I mean, like for example, I mean, granted, like for one example, like Family Guy. Granted, it started in '99. It also was canceled 3 times. For its certain humor and certain again pushing the envelope.
We all know, the type of humor that's in Family
No, no,
Guy.
no, yeah, but like I mean, but you had other shows like I don't know if Futurama came out in '99. Maybe it did, but like a lot of them came out in like '99 for some weird reason. Um, but like a lot of those like weird adult animated shows like that, they basically some of them were created by like Seth MacFarlane. Another one, of course, Futurama was created by the creator of The Simpsons.
Yeah.
So they followed the same kind of crude humor, different styles of like today's like topics and like making fun of like certain events and world um events and whatever. But the point is like you look at TV shows now, a lot of them are just they're not the same. Like
No, and they're, it's very much like adult themes, swearing, the adult humor, the crude jokes. It's a lot of it's like meant to be raunchy on purpose.
Well, like, so one example that you and I looked up together was we went on HBO. Well, it used to be HBO Max, but now it's just called Max. So you look at one example, it was called the show's just called Velma. Okay. It's literally about like Scooby Doo, right? But really it's Velma. And, of course, there's Shaggy and there's Daphne and Fred. But it's a whole nother ball game. It's not just like your original like Scooby Doo gang that you saw back in the '60s, and then moving forward, it's a whole new take
It's
on
a
this.
very raunchy show from episode 1. It's extremely like swearing. They blur out, the small bits, but they show everything else. Just very, very raunchy. And you look at the cover and it just shows the character. It says Velma in big letters. So you think like, oh, it's just going to be a cartoon. No, it's not.
No.
It's something radically different. And, there's another one on Max about Harley Quinn.
Oh.
And if you look at the cover, unmistakable what she's riding.
Yeah, we're not going to go into that, but yes, she's writing something that basically I'm very surprised that they were showing on Max.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I understand like, HBO or really Max itself was always really more for adults. But like if a kid was watching
But to
this,
have that image, it's not like an innuendo.
no, it's right in your face.
It's very, very, very clear like what this thing is. And that's like, you look at what's going on today, I can guarantee you if you go into Netflix right now, most of their adult animation is all you'll find.
Oh yeah, I mean,
and there's a ton that I've never even heard of.
Well, I could tell you one TV show that we honestly thought when we were working together when we were coworkers. We watched one episode of this one particular show.
Oh yeah.
What was it? What was it, Matt? What was the show that we were talking about?
Why don't you tell him?
No, I can't remember the exact title off the top of my head. I know you know it. I know once you say it, I'll be like, yep. Go ahead.
I don't remember the name of it either.
Oh, come on, Matt. I thought you would have known it.
I don't.
My God. All I can remember is the theme song is like it basically goes, I'm going through changes, right? And it like kind of goes into it. Oh my God, it's driving me nuts, Matt. I need to look it up, man. Like it's driving me nuts. I mean, I know they made a spinoff called Human Resources, which is actually even worse.
That show is even worse. Yeah.
That one's even worse. What is the show, man? Like I'm drawing a blank. The fact that you didn't know. Like I'm just trying to remember.
I don't remember the name of that show at all.
Matt's looking that up, but I think the point we're trying to make here is that a lot of TV shows nowadays are very raunchy, very
Big Mouth.
Oh, Big Mouth. Yes. Okay, so let me just put it this way. First episode, both Matt and I were like, "Oh man, this must be a kid's show."
Nope.
No, not a chance. Like literally, we watched it and we were like, I mean, we both laughed. Don't get me wrong, it was funny, but it was not what you would have thought. Like I would not recommend having your kids watch the show. It is not something that they need to be watching. I would say maybe when they're, I don't know, like a teenager, or maybe a little bit. I would say maybe probably more like high school, like towards
Probably
the end.
more like Never, maybe.
Okay, well then you could say that about Family Guy and a few others, but
I mean, they probably shouldn't watch Family Guy either. But
I mean, but
it's really, a lot of these shows. Like, yes, if you're an adult, South Park. I would say some of the episodes, not all of them, because not all of them are funny to me. But
no, yeah,
a lot of them are funny. Not every aspect
Yeah.
of the show is funny, but some of the things that they've done are hilarious. Beavis and Butthead, hilarious to me. Not everything, but a lot of it is funny. So a lot of these things, like Archer is another perfect example.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Archer is hilarious,
absolutely.
but it's wildly inappropriate.
But again, that's why when I really think we should talk about morality, my friend, because at some point we got to talk about it. But reality is like when your kids are like, "Hey, I really want to watch the show." Reality is this, like, you should probably just watch it with them. Just watch the first episode. If in the first 10 minutes you're like, "Nah, this ain't happening," then it's probably not going to be a TV show you really want your kids to watch. Because, like, we're mentioning TV shows that we've watched, and I could tell you that I would never, especially especially if my kid grows up and does whatever, like, I will have to watch these shows, of course, by myself, just like any other show
Yeah.
that I've watched. But I wouldn't want him to watch it with me because then I'd be like, no, I'm not trying to explain what is going on in this TV show and to do all that. But it's sad that a lot of the TV shows, like we've already mentioned, and some of the today's versions of these TV shows that even they remade or done whatever from like back in the 60s all the way up or whatever. It's sad that they're just reimagining it, they're sexualizing it, they're making it more raunchy, they're
Going
doing
for
all
like
these things.
basically the shock value of let's do this, but let's m- make it raunchier. Let's add these crude jokes into it.
No, like I said, like if you're an adult and like and you, of course, I'm a little bit older, of course, but like you find certain things, of course, funny. Now I get it. As we get older, we change our views, we have different
Of
beliefs, but
course,
like
yeah.
you know the way I look at it is like if you grew up in certain generations, you might find other things, let's say about today, that are probably funny because yeah, it's kind of that same raunchy humor, but
Yeah.
like if a kid's watching it and they have no idea, and then you're like, yeah, you didn't grow up in this era, so I'm not really trying to like
But
get on that same level.
it's one thing too, like, and I've said it, I think during the DC reboot series, I probably have said it many other times. You know, being content creators, which is what we are with this podcast, we create this content. It really takes like imagination, and when you're just trying to do shock value and trying to make things, you know, funny, but let's just create this crude humor because that's what's popular. To me, like that really shows like a lack of imagination. It shows a lack of I can't really tell a story, so let's just do what everybody else is doing. And with this podcast, like, sure, we could make it funny, we could make it raunchy, like we could make it explicit, we could swear and tell crude jokes, and we would probably get more listens and plays that way.
Oh, we definitely would, especially between the both of us. But that's not
Uh,
what we're trying to do.
And that's exactly what we're not trying to do. We want to be creative. We want to create our own ideas without having to go down that route. And a show like Velma, you go down that route of creating a show that is just raunchy, you kind of ruin the character itself.
Well, you also ruin the nostalgia behind where these characters come from. I mean, because Velma and like all the characters that are in it, like they're from the original Scooby Doo series from back in the day, and it's like no, like that's not how we need to reimagine this. Like if you're going to take a show from like the 80s, 90s, or even earlier than that, if you're going to reimagine it, then at least keep the character's likeness, keep the same style. Maybe
Yeah.
if you want to add some humor, maybe certain things to it, great. But like, there's no reason to.
Use your imagination and create a real story. Like
Right.
don't be, we have to make this person like this. No, you don't. Create use your imagination. Like don't conform to, you know, this is what Archer's doing, so we need to create a show that looks like that, but you know, is different.
Right. And I mean, and that's the thing about TV shows now. It's like, or even movies, right? I mean, like you look at Tron. I always mention Tron because it's like it's a prime example of like they did the movie, and then they're like, okay, we're gonna make a legacy. Granted they kind of revamped it and like make it a sequel, but like they basically took a movie from back in the 80s or whatever, and then just like try to recreate it. Which I mean, in some ways was great, but like there could have maybe some other aspects or something like that. Like so, there's definitely movies that like that came out in, let's say, the 60s, 70s or whatever, and then they decided, hey, we're gonna literally take that same idea and then literally forget the character and like reimagine it, And then, sometimes it's like, okay, it's great, but then sometimes you're like, what did you just do to that character? And why
Yeah.
did you do that? So why don't you just look at it, what happened back then? And then, like I said, maybe do a more modern take, but to a degree that isn't like destroying the character itself and making it so that it's, I guess, would it be really hard to like follow along. And it's not the same story that you already grew up on, like from way back when. And I think that's what a lot of people do is that they just like take old stories and they just like
We just have
screw it
this
up.
ongoing theme on the show where every episode we say the same thing, and
Clearly,
writers have lost touch with what they're writing,
but-
and they need to just maybe take a step back. Maybe the strike is a good thing, because maybe when they finally not on strike, they'll come back with more ideas, or maybe they'll just get sick and tired of having writers, and
maybe they use the AI.
they'll use AI, and AI will finally get it right. I don't know, but writers have definitely like lost touch, and you can take fans of Scooby Doo, put them in a room, and go, "We want to create a a cartoon series or adult animation series about Velma from Scooby Doo. What do we do?" And those people would give you really solid ideas.
Actually, believe it or not, and it's not just even that, but I was thinking like over time, think about of all the fan made like films or little like clips or
Yeah.
whatever that it's not even just like the ones we mentioned. Like I can't even think of a lot of them, but like some of them were pretty good. Like some of them were really cool ideas that a lot of the fans created. And it's like, you can have all these writers that are well known for like creating certain TV shows or whatever, but why not get new fresh faces? It's kind of like actors, right? Like you see the same actors over and over and over again. Like it's great. I mean, some certain ones they're great for that role, but there's reasons why they also decided, you know what, we're going to choose somebody that isn't well known to, let's say, play certain roles because you know what, they don't know
Yeah.
what they do. So like the same thing with like writers or even directors or producers, right? Like pick people that also might have a different vision than what they've already seen what Hollywood does, right? So like granted, you look at James Cameron, you look at Steven Spielberg, you look at George Lucas, like all these famous directors. Yeah, they've had their time. They do great, amazing work, but then there's going to be times where they're going to need new directors to come in. Like for example, like the Russo brothers, right, who did an amazing job on Endgame. Just throwing it out there, right? But I'm just throwing it out there because like these, I'm not saying they weren't well known, but I'll tell you this: they're well known because Endgame, again, because they did so amazing on that movie that it's the second best selling movie of all time.
Yeah.
So they need new, fresh faces. So why don't you just do that with the writers and maybe bring in fans or something?
Yeah,
They need to change it
they
up.
definitely need better content, you know, and instead of all this like adult animation and making just everything, not everything has to be raunchy.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, there is one that I wanted to mention. It's a relatively newer show, so it doesn't fall into the 80s and 90s. So
Oh, so
whatever.
wait, so you're saying this is like one of the good shows that you should watch?
Um, but it is on Prime Video,
Okay.
and the the show, I guess it is more of an adult animation, but it's
Oh,
it's called Invincible.
yeah. I think what's his face? The guy who plays J. Jonah Jameson, right? I'm trying to remember the actor's name, but
Yeah,
like,
he plays Omni Man, I believe.
okay, yep.
And so it's an animated show. It's on Prime, and it's gone for one season so far. They just released kind of a prequel series on one of the characters,
Oh, okay.
and season 2 is supposed to be starting, I think, at the end of the month. But it's one of those shows that's like, it is really gritty. It's gory. They do swear, but it's not raunchy.
Hmm.
And it kind of reminds me of, you know, back with in the days of like GI Joe and Transformers and the
Yeah.
animation style. Um, but it's character driven. The whole show is a story, so it's got both like the character driven and the story driven.
So they basically take both aspects, which is great.
Yeah, because it definitely, you get to learn the characters and the whole show. It's basically a movie, like a long movie.
Wait, so how many episodes for the first season, though?
I want to say maybe 10.
Okay, so typical. Yeah.
So it is a really, really good show. And one of the rumors is in the new Mortal Kombat 1, I believe.
Oh, yep.
Omni-Man is supposed to be one of the DLC characters.
Well, if that's the case, then I clearly have to pick up Mortal Kombat 1.
So just putting it out there. But it is a really good show. Like following it, it's up there.
Okay.
As far as like one of the shows that I would watch. And when season 2 comes out, I'm obviously gonna probably binge that.
Yeah. You'll probably watch it in a night. It's okay. He's like, Saturday night, here I come. But
it's one of those shows. I mean, it doesn't does it constantly swear, like The Boys does? No, it doesn't.
Listen.
But do they occasionally like let out, a bomb? Yeah, they do.
Listen, when you keep bringing up The Boys, I'm just look.
The Boys has their own.
I understand
Cartoon series too. I never watched it yet, but
wait, there's an actual cartoon series on this?
I believe it's called Diabolical.
Oh no.
I haven't watched it.
If it's anything like that live action, oh my god!
If it's anything like the show, yes,
oof.
It's gonna be raunchy.
Oh god, no.
Invincible's a really good show, but I guess wrap it up and.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want me to wrap it up? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I said kind of just wrap it up.
Wrap it up. Oh, my bad. Okay, so guys, again, talked about some interesting TV shows. So if you're ever interested, of course, you can always hit us up, and we can always give you some more suggestions on 80s and 90s. Like TV shows and whatnot. I mean, again, you really should check out that playlist, man, because I haven't even listened to all of it, but I know it's pretty good stuff. If you want to listen to some of the theme songs,
it's a pretty extensive playlist, and it's on our Linktree. So if you go on Facebook or the website, it's linked there.
Yeah, and again, guys, we love the support. We love what you guys do. Hell, check out our merch store. But as always,
stay geeky.